Hi, I'm Gohar Vardanyan, and today, instead of an etude, I thought we would talk about sight reading. This is a topic that comes up pretty frequently, usually in the context of a guitarist or a guitar student expressing an insecurity about reading music on the guitar, being okay in a lower position and getting overwhelmed in higher positions, or just in general being confused by the whole process or overwhelmed with it. And it's with good reason. I think in general it is from the nature of our instrument, it is more complicated to read music on the guitar. We do have a lot of notes we have to read at the same time. It is written on one staff, which some people can say it's a blessing because we only have one clef to read, but at the same time it's a lot of notes crowded into a small space. There are a lot of notations around notes a lot of times, and we do have the same note appearing in different places and different positions. It's not as visual as, for example, the piano, where if notes are going up in pitch, you're just going to go from left to right and all the octaves are identical. From one octave to another, you can take exactly the same pattern, move it up, and you will have the exactly same sound, just an octave or a few higher. In the guitar, that doesn't really work. As soon as you change positions, you might have to change the order of your fingers, the shape of your chords. And the string, it's not regular, the intervals we have between the strings. They're all fourths except for the third and second string where you have a third. So we do have all these reasons we can say that reading on a guitar is difficult. I can grant you that. However, the real cause is that we just don't do a lot of it. We don't practice sight reading. And just from the nature of what we do, a lot of times we read music just to learn the piece, try to commit it to memory as quickly as we can so we can start practicing and playing it. So we don't really sight read. Where another instrumentalist playing in an orchestra or accompanying or playing with a group, they're always reading music, and they're always reading music that maybe they have never played before. They're actually doing the true sight reading, which is basically the very, very first time you get to play something you've never played before. If you are doing it for the second time, the third time, that's not really sight reading. That's reading music, but it's not really sight reading because you have residue information left over from the previous time you did try to read it. So it comes down to practice. However, it also comes down to deliberately making yourself better at it if you find that is something that's important to you. So besides just telling you to go and practice, a few things that can help you. So I'm not going to talk about actually learning the notes because I feel like you need to know the alphabet before you start reading. So let's assume you are very familiar with actually knowing the notes that are on the staff. This is more to translate those notes onto the guitar. Obviously, when you first learn to play the guitar, you have to learn the open strings, and most of you, I'm sure, are very comfortable reading the open strings and reading the few notes that you have in the first 4 or 5 frets. I think most people are okay with the 5th fret because this is when where you first learn to tune the guitar, so you realize that these notes are unison. And then because most of the beginner pieces are in first position, that's where you get all of your first practice, so you end up being more comfortable in first position. So in order to become comfortable reading in higher positions, you have to make that extra step and deliberately learn the notes that are in a higher position. There is really no way around it. At some point you have to memorize at least some key frets. I like to make sure that my students know the 7th fret, like cold, as well as you know the open strings, you should know the notes on the 7th fret. If you are quick to think about music theory, they're just a 5th above the open string. So it depends on how comfortable you are with music theory. If you used to play on a different instrument or just really good at it, you can just think a 5th above. But if that's not something you're comfortable with, just memorize the notes. These are basically all natural notes except that for one single F sharp, so that should eliminate some confusion. The 6th string and the 1st string are the same, so you really only end up having to learn 5 notes. So the 7th fret, know it super, super well. Besides the fact that it's in the middle of the fretboard, it's a fret that gets used a lot, especially in keys that we play, and these notes come up pretty frequently. Then the 12th fret you already know, because if you know the open strings, then you immediately know what these are. You just have to think that they're an octave higher. What sometimes happens is when someone's looking for a note that they don't know in a higher position, they end up starting to count all the way from the beginning, not realizing that they can count backwards from the 12th fret. So just keep that in mind. You can do that. Another step is to memorize the 10th fret, because again, the notes on the 10th fret come up very frequently in music, specifically in the keys that we play as guitarists, which obviously we don't play in a lot of flat keys. In the beginning repertoire, you will be playing in the major and minor A, major minor E, and D. So notes here, the D, the A, the F, which is kind of odd, I guess, we don't use it as often, and then you have the C and a G and then another D. Those notes you will encounter very frequently. Also, once you know the 10th fret, you have another reference point. So all of the notes around it that are mysterious to you right now, you can just think of immediately, because for a G sharp, you know where your A is, you go a step down. For a B flat, you know where your B is, you go a step down. Or an A sharp, depending on how you think you know your A, you go up again for the A sharp. So it eliminates the counting and just the overwhelming amount of, oh my god, I'm in a higher position, where am I going to find these notes? Memorize them. You can do it without the guitar in your hands. You can just go in order. On your drive to work, just name the notes on the 10th fret from 6th string to 1st and 1st string to 6th. Same thing with the 7th. And once you sort of know it like the open strings, you're good to go. Another step is to memorize all the repeated notes. So as I mentioned in the beginning, and you already know this, the guitar, you have more than one option for each pitch that you play. For the most part, you can definitely find it in one other place, except for the low notes on the 6th string. But in some places, in certain higher notes, you have 3 or 4 options. So first start with the open strings. You have your E, know where all of the equivalent E's are. So there's one on the 5th fret, one on the 9th fret, and one on the 14th fret. You should know them immediately. Just as fast as I did that, you should be able to do this. First, you will have to think about it, maybe use your knowledge of the 7th fret or the knowledge of the 10th fret to reference and find the E, but then just memorize their location. Same thing with the B string. You have the B on the open 4th fret, and then again that 9th fret, and one on the 14th. Same thing with the G, the 5th fret. You should know that pretty well. And then you have one here, 2 frets back from the A. You already know, right? And you have another one here. Learn it, I think, up to the 16th, 15th fret, I guess. In the lower notes, you should know them. If you don't know these notes in this area on the basses, chances are you're never going to use them. You should know the notes in the higher position, but we can leave that to a little bit later, because chances are by the time you are playing repertoire that is going to take you way up here, you'll also be an advanced enough reader where that won't be a problem. So once you know all of your unisons, you're actually not going to be as overwhelmed when you see the notes and you need to read in a higher position, because you have so many key points now from which to count forwards and backwards. This will help immensely to just not get freaked out, So, and then after that, really, it's to practice. For practice, there are a few things you can do. To start out simply, pick something that's just a single voice melody. You can pick something from like children's books, violin books, like Suzuki books from the beginner, like very first grade. And instead of reading those notes in first position, force yourself to read it in a higher position. So let's say you decide it's 5th position day today, and you read all of those notes in 5th position. If they don't exist, you might have to shift a couple, but you're not going to go below the 5th fret. And also limit yourself to not using any open strings, because that's also a way we can make it easier for ourselves. But depends on how much you want to challenge yourself. And then let's say pick another position, 7th position, and read everything above that, and don't allow yourself to go any lower unless a note doesn't exist in a higher position. So as I mentioned, pick things that are with single voices. Violin, I said violin because it's in treble clef. Don't pick something in a different clef. That's just going to make it more complicated. And Suzuki books because they're mostly really easy. Also, just in general, graded, easy guitar repertoire. that is meant to be played in first position, that's something that you might have played before when you were starting to play, do the same thing, just move it up the fretboard. In the beginning, it's okay to read music that you are familiar with. By just changing the position, you're already giving yourself something new to work on. So even though technically sight reading is not reading something you already know, but when you're trying to just learn the notes and get more comfortable in a higher position, read something that you already know, because the sound of the music will help at least with the rhythm, right? Which brings me to the next point for sight reading. Now, the rhythm is the most important thing that in reading. It's really not about all the right notes that you're going to play, but more so the rhythmic value and the timing of everything and the timeline. If you play the right rhythm, but you play the wrong notes, yes, it will sound awful. But if you're playing with other people, you're going to be in the same timeline with them. So I guess you might hit the wrong notes and stuff, but you'll be with them. So eventually you'll find the right note and you'll play it at the right time and you'll sync up with them. However, if you play all the right notes, but let's say you took extra time to find that right note and you played it right, but you played it at the wrong time, it's still not right. And it also puts your timeline at a different place compared to the actual music, that once it starts, it doesn't stop. So it will be way, way, way more difficult to be able to find your place again in the context of the other musicians. And even if you're doing this by yourself, yeah, if you're just learning the music and you can stop and go as much as you want, but if you're trying to learn to look ahead and to read and to do it fluently, you have to keep going no matter what. And to get better at reading rhythm, you have to practice reading rhythm. You don't have to do it with the guitar in your hands. It's actually better to take the guitar away and just concentrate on the rhythmic values of the notes by either clapping or tying. Sometimes tying is better because you can sustain. So, for example, if it's a half note, you can hold the ta as long as you need to for the 2 beats, and give it the length that it is. Or you can tap, whatever you feel comfortable with. That way you learn to read the actual rhythmic values without being distracted by the pitch. And what happens is you start to recognize the picture, the way things are, like on the page, for the rhythm, the way things are beamed. If it's done correctly, which if it's a publication, a reputable publication, it will be done correctly. All of those beamings, they're there to help us. You might wonder sometimes why you might have, I don't know, a dotted quarter note and then an eighth with a flag and then two eighth notes with a beam, and not just the dotted quarter notes and all three eighth notes beamed together. This is just for us to be able to read the beats way easier. If you see a dotted quarter note and then an eighth note with the little flag, like an individual one, and then 2/8 notes, visually that already tells you that those last 2 notes are on a separate beat, and that eighth note that's single, it's part of the second beat, and of course the dotted quarter note is the first beat going over. If I wrote it a dotted quarter note and then 3/8 notes but beamed together, those 3/8 notes are going to look like a triplet to you, and you're going to want to play that first note of the 3/8 on the beat, because that's what you're probably used to from reading correctly published and engraved music. So those kind of things, first they tell you sort of where the beats are. If I saw dotted quarter notes and 3/8 notes beamed together, I would assume it's 6/8 time, for example. If I saw a dotted quarter note and then a single eighth note with the flag and then 2/8 notes, I would assume it's 3/4 time. So these are things that your eyes get used to without you having to count out the rhythm. You just see it and you see where the beats are. You know if you're supposed to play that beat, that note on the beat or in the middle of the beat or on the O of the beat or whatever, if it's like one E and So by practicing it on its own, you become better at it. Same thing comes with notes. It's just like reading an alphabet, like an actual book. At first, you might have been thinking of every single letter, sounding it out, and then putting into a word. And then the next time you see the combination of those certain letters, you recognize the word right away, and then you don't have to count it out or say it out loud. And then you see words at a time, and sometimes an entire sentence. That's what happens with reading music as well. You start recognizing patterns on the page. You recognize if it's 4 notes per beat going stepwise. If you see that visually, you don't have to now think I'm playing a C and then a D and then an E. You realize you're starting on a C. Let's say you're in a key of C major. You can assume what the rest of the notes are, and that comes with experience. And the more you do it, the more your eye will pick up bigger passages and the less you'll have to go note by note. Now, once you've done the more basic things and you've read the really simple pieces that you might have known in your early days of playing and forced yourself to play it in a higher position, you've practiced your rhythm reading and the keep going part of sight reading, you can go a step further and use something like a sight reading book. The one I have here is Progressive Reading for Guitarists. It's by Stephen Dodgson and Hector Quine. And this one was specifically written for challenging guitarists to read music and to not make excuses for us. So the reason I like the book, it's, as I mentioned earlier, picking a piece that you are familiar with helps in reading music. A lot of times, if you're playing Western music from that common practice era, tonal music, there's certain cadences, there are certain passages, just motives that are coming. So, for example, if I play this, our ear, if you have any experience, is telling us that the next note is this. So I don't even need to look at the music. I'm going to assume this is the next note because that chord needs a resolution. It's a seventh I'm playing, and a major seventh always resolves out to an octave, right? So things like that. I brought a very, very simple example, but there's certain chords that once you hit that chord, you only have 2 ways out of it. They're either going to go resolve one way or another, or just one chord. And the more you play, the more experience you have just playing, those are things that your fingers are going to have in their muscle memory, and you're not going to necessarily read the music anymore. You're just going to assume that's what's coming next, and you're going to play that chord. You might find yourself that you played it wrong, but that's usually a surprise, like from a piece that maybe didn't follow all the theory, the rules of that era. With this book, when you're playing these melodies, they're meant to challenge. They're not even melodies, like that's what I mean. Like they sometimes sound like random notes as you're putting them together, and that's the purpose of it. The purpose is to read the notes and not be able to guess what's coming next. That way, it's really making sure that you are concentrated on translating the information from the page, and there are no fingerings. Oftentimes with guitar music, it's someone's edition and it has fingerings in it, and we end up, and I'm totally guilty of this, we end up reading fingerings more so than the pitches. It makes it easier. It becomes like a form of tablature. So even though I'm really bad at reading tablature, but when I read regular staff notation, if I see fingerings, my immediate grasp is the fingering, and if I don't like it later on, I change it, but that's what I go for before I go for the notes. So with the exercises, you don't have a lot of fingerings there, if any. Now, just to give you, I'm not going to go through the whole book because it's a lot of pages, but just to give you an idea, the very, very, very first exercise does have fingerings in it, and it starts in 5th position. Now, the idea is that you want to be able to read higher up, so you start there. There are certain rules that are set in place. So for this first one, you have to read in 1st position, and you cannot use any open strings. It just, at first, it has this pattern written out with fingering. So you have this, and then you have the same thing on the bottom strings, etc. And the instructions are that you have to repeat until you can play the exercise, saying the note names without looking at the notation. So that means that the pattern is already given, and then you're going to be calling out the names. So it adds an extra layer of attention, right? So you're not just moving your fingers, but you're saying the names as you're playing, which means by verbalizing them, you're going to learn them better. So you end up knowing 4 frets here. And then with the later exercise, it's a little bit different. So you have a different rhythm. listening to it, you couldn't really guess what was going to come next. Where I stumbled was something I wasn't expecting was going to happen, and that's the point. You have to keep going. I actually hesitated, so you should really keep going. And just as an example, again, I'm going to jump to exercise number 10. This one I really like because it's more about reading the rhythm than it is about the pitches. So it tells you in the very beginning that the only pitches you're going to be using are the C, the F natural, and the C. You're not going to find any other note in that exercise, which limits your options. So then you just have to read the actual exercise. So it's in 4/4 time. You have the first, second beat quiet, and then you have 3, and on the end of 3 you begin. Oops. So that's the kind of thing it is. There are a number of exercises where you put the fingers down that you need, and then you just have to pluck the right one of the 3 options and play at the right rhythm. Sometimes it's 4. And let's see. This is sight reading for me too. I kind of used this book before to practice sight reading, but it was so long ago that I've already forgotten. So for example, this one, it says, I'm going to do sight reading on camera. This is the first. It says you have to read all the notes in 4th position, and it has to be on the 3 upper strings, right? So now you're in 4th position, 3 upper strings, so my options are this, and notes would be I played it right. I think I played the rhythms right, and that's the important thing. If I played the wrong notes, I kept going, so I would say I did a good job, and I would go on to the next one. I would avoid playing the same exercise more than once in a row, because then you will start remembering, and it will defeat the purpose of the exercise because you won't be sight reading it. So what I would do is, and I think in the preface when I read it, that's what it suggested as well, to play the exercise only once. Try to do your best to keep going and keep going even if you play the wrong notes. Then play a few more. And then later on you can come back and you can play them. At that point to sort of like work on more on the details and maybe correct mistakes you had before. And because you had all of this practice, maybe you'll do better at it. But that way, enough time would have passed where when you come back to it, you don't remember it anymore. So it's kind of like sight reading again. So things like that really challenge you at first, but it will really help you read the rhythms, familiarize yourself with the fretboard, how it feels, so you don't have to look at it, and you just know like, okay, I'm in 4th position. So as you see the notes, you're also visualizing the fretboard, so you don't have to check. You just know like, okay, if my first finger is playing these notes, then these certain notes are going to be under each finger. And the rest of it really is to practice. What will happen as you become a better player and as you become a better sight reader is that you really stop looking at notes individually. Now, there will always be a really complicated piece of music where you're just dumbfounded looking at it, and you will have to look at every single note because there's so many accidentals attached to it, or it's really atonal, and none of your natural instincts to resolve something a certain way come in handy, because that's not what the music does. But depending on the repertoire you're playing, you'll be able to recognize chords. So for example, a lot of times reading multiple notes at the same time can be daunting because you have this ink blot in there that's their notes, but you have to look individually to find them. Eventually you'll start recognizing them. You can see if it's in root position, or it's in thirds, or where the seconds are. You just see it, and from experience of just playing, your fingers will form a chord. Like if I say play an A minor chord, your hand just does this. You don't have to think, okay, I need to play an E and then an A and a C. You just do this. So same thing happens. You see that, and when you see that A minor representation on the page in an order of notes. As a picture, your fingers just do this. So it really comes down to doing it as much as possible. Once you become more intermediate or just better at it, then read music that is within your playing level. Oftentimes when you're practicing sight reading, it's better to read music that's easier than your technical ability, so that you're not also hindered by just not being able to play the piece. So it's something you can physically do, and you're just working on the sight reading of it or the reading of it. As you become better and better at it, then read music that maybe you don't plan on learning it immediately, but you want to know what it sounds like or what it feels like to play it. Read music within your level and try to keep going and try to figure out. As I said, the more you do it, the better it becomes. So just to summarize, first, memorize key points, memorize all of the repetitions of the notes, play simple melodies and on one string, or not one string, just one line in higher positions on different strings, and use something like, this is not the only sight reading book, I'm sure, it's just the one that I have. Use exercises like that. Even you can make up your own. You can, if you really wanted to, you could write random notes on the page and force yourself to read it. And read as much music as you can, and you will find that the more you do it, the easier it becomes. So I hope this was helpful. I know this was a little bit on the longer side, but it had to be done. And I'll see you next time with probably an etude. And if you have any other questions or another topic that you'd like me to talk about, please write in the comments or send me an email. Even if you don't get a personalized reply to the comment or to the email, I do read them. It's just I can't always reply to dozens of comments that come in because it takes a lot of time. But I keep the comments and the questions in mind, so whenever an opportunity comes for me to answer in this kind of format, I will do so. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.